And we're back with the most popular units for the month of August. Orcs have been crumping this month, raising our win rate by 5%, winning our first GT, as well as many top 5 placings. Let's take a look at the data sheets and the WAAAGH tactics being used. We'll address the comments after our top 10. Tell us your top units in the comments. With that being said, there's no guesses behind these gits. Storm Boys coming in at number 1. I know some of you guys are thinking trucks. No, no, no. Storm Boys made it on essentially every single winning list that we came across, right? If you checked our prior listing about a month ago, Grots were actually up there as well as trucks instead. What we are seeing is that people are opting for the points increase just to bring Storm Boys instead, especially after the changes to Grots not being T5 in combat. Now that that was cleared up, people just decided I'd rather go for speed, that T5, get them where I need to go, and possible skirmishing from the Storm Boys. Also, we don't have too many deep strike units in our index. You know, we have Death Compass is another option, but Storm Boys for 65 points, you can't beat them. The Power Claw itself sometimes is more useful than the Grots as a whole. So not saying the Grots aren't useful, because they're still in the top 10. But Storm Boys. Storm Boys ideally are used for scoring secondaries, possible rapid ingress, but another way that I've heard them being used and seen them being used myself is that, say you have a unit that you want to get into combat with, Custodes, World Eaters, fight first kind of units, strong melee opposition armies. Maybe they're walking around in bricks and blobs like Terminators. You want to come in there with Storm Boys, tag these big bricks and bobs of units, and when people pile in, they have to pile in to the nearest model. That means your Storm Boys are going to be taking up some of the big crumping hits, while your Squighog Boys, or maybe your Knobs, or a Beast Boss on foot, or Mazrog are at the tip of the unit and fighting the entire unit while only being punched back by a couple of enemy opposition. So Storm Boys aren't just used for scoring, they're also used for deterring enemy blob units. So don't limit yourself to just scoring with them and not knowing what to do. Sometimes they're there just to soak up additional damage from enemy elite units.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you also mentioned earlier that just the deep strike threat, I feel like you always have to have that on whichever list you run. You want to keep your opponent honest and keep some of their units back to protect their own home objective.
Exactly, because like we said about orcs, it's a controlled rate of attrition. And if people know that they can frontline their entire army to you and just meet you force on force in the middle of the table with all of their assets and resources, that diminishes your ability to control the rate of attrition. So having something in deep strike that can also rapid ingress makes a huge difference, much better than strategic reserves. So that being said, we can move on to number 2, which is not going to catch anybody off guard, but still very valuable and common units, as no one's going to beat the mighty truck as the number 2. Sorry, I'll give a little second delay. So as you guys seen in the thumbnail, regardless, trucks made it to number 2 instead of being number 1. And that's only by a very, very small margin. You know, shout out to Mark Perry and a couple other people. But, you know, there's a couple lists that are very skewy that just chose not to be trucks. Now, why are trucks so amazing? Just in case you haven't caught on. Firing deck is obviously super useful, especially now that flash gets to become more prevalent in the meta. Having something for 50 points that is T8 with a built-in 6-up invuln, 10 wounds, 2 OC, and transferring 12 boys or 12 models instead of just 10, like a lot of other units, is something that a ton of other factions wish they had. It helps us with controlling our rate of attrition as well, as it protects our low save, kind of soft chaff units or infantry as a whole. Now, our toughness is good, but our armor save is not. When you throw enough dice as an orc, they're going to throw enough dice at orc units, they will get demolished. So trucks for 50 points, just a no-brainer. Of course, tank shock being strength 10 with the wrecking balls you can see right there definitely comes to play. And now that secondaries are not limited to an infantry type unit or anything like that, really trucks can get up there and utilize just about every secondary that you need to be scoring for the mission. They're big enough to sometimes even hold 2 objectives at once on missions such as Ritual. So that being said, trucks are a no-brainer. No one's surprised by this. And I think we can move on to unit number 3. Now, Squighog Boys made it to the top 3 finally. Squig Hog Boys were used in a variety of different ways. Of course, they're always used for fighting and crumping, but where Squig Hog Boys are starting to kind of get different is you'll see 6-man unit Squig Hog Boys with a knob on Smash Squig. You'll see a 6-man unit of boys without a knob. You'll see 3-man units used for skirmishing, and you will use. People are now realizing, if you look at the bottom of the screen, Squig Hog Boys have grenades. I like to emphasize that because sometimes you're going into a unit with your skirmishing Squig Hog Boy unit. You throw a bomb squig in there, you throw a grenade in there, and all of a sudden you're punching up into units that will catch your enemy off guard and getting great trades for a unit that you already greatly appreciate with its Feel No Pain.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that these top 3 units we just covered are all fast units.
Yeah.
Like Eddie always says, control your rate of attrition. That speed is, you're gonna outmaneuver most armies. And that's why these units are being taken.
And controlling the board as an orc player matters because that also matters to the line of sights on units that want to be shot. Now, Squig Hog Boys as a whole are always going to be favored and loved because of the Feel No Pain. They throw the math off and everything like that. But with the changes to combat, that the fact that you have to base enemy unit models, that it's harder to get entire bricks of units into combat. Squig Hog Boys being able to essentially flower off the knob, meaning the knob will be the one who gets into base contact and the rest of them will touch his base, makes a huge difference, right? Before, in prior editions or prior points in the game, having huge bases was always seen as a detriment for the most part because you could just get guys into combat but be within 2 inches of them. Not anymore. Now it's base to base, very important. The fight phase is very meticulous now in this edition, and Squig Hog Boys kind of help you with that, right?
And I don't know if you mentioned the bomb squig. That's always nice to have, those mortal wounds. Hurt your enemy a little bit before you get into combat.
Yeah, and that's because, as you can see, it does not say anything about you need to see the enemy unit. That means when enemy counterpunching units are trying to stage, touch them up, throw a squig into them, right? You see a nice elite unit, throw some squigs into them. And for the fact that a lot of the time orc units do lag shooting, bomb squigs themselves and grenades end up being our shooting as well as tank shot. So that's not going to catch anybody off guard. But let's go into our number 4, the Grots. Grots are still making an appearance. Now, the numbers of Grots has greatly diminished. Typically, you see 1 unit. Sometimes you see 2 units. And that's straight up for the CP. Usually people just want the CP. Having 2 OC each for such a garbage chaff unit is great. They can also be used very similarly to Storm Boys, where you'll charge a unit that's a brick, make Custodes or World Eaters or Space Marines or other orcs fight Grots, or and that's not what they want. So that's another way they can be used. And as a whole, having a 10-man unit that can space out quite well and hold the corner of the board while you kind of move around the rest of the board and utilize that to play the mission is great. So Grots, no-brainer. Of course, they're not T5 in combat anymore, which people thought they would be. They changed the wording on the data sheet. If you haven't caught on to that, just so you guys know, do not use your Grots as T5 in combat at all. I understand the rules. It's okay. But GW cleared up. They do not want you using Grots as T5 in combat, period. They are T2. Okay. And that being said, we can move on to a slightly more interesting unit that, again, got dropped from the top 3, but still very, very prevalent. Beast Snagga Boys. So a lot of the time, people are opting into Beast Snagga Boys simply because they're strength 5. It's straight up because they're strength 5. I know the rerolls to hit is great, but that really comes into play more or less when you have the characters leading them, right? And you're looking for that extra punch. But when you're talking about straight up skirmishing, units that can get inside of a truck, maybe even slightly more durable because the built-in 6 Feel No Pain, people opt for the strength 5 that can get up to strength 6 during the WAAAGH. As everything's gone up in toughness, having a base strength 4, like a typical boy, moving up to 5 just isn't worth it when there's T10 models running around everywhere. And so people just opt Beast Snagga Boys, no-brainer. They're very cool models, good rules, strong, and with character support, they're extra good in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, I think one reason they kind of dropped a few spots here is most people use them for their monster vehicle reroll ability, and now we're kind of seeing the mech guns kind of fulfill that role. People are starting to bring those out. So these are slightly dropping, but still popular enough to bring because, like you said, strength 5 is just very useful to have.
Yeah, and I think people went more into Squig Hog Boys, and they realized Beast Snagga Boys aren't great at killing the monsters, even though their data sheet says that. What they're great at is when they have the Beast Boss and they get exploding 5. The Beast Boss goes and smashes, and then the boys themselves help kind of clean it up a bit. But that goes back to my skirmishing. For 105 points, you can still punch the booty and crump the booty out of a lot of different armies. And that's exactly what Beast Snagger Boys do. And that being said, we can move on to the knobs. Now, the knob and the war boss are in tandem when I put them in this positioning. I know I didn't put the war boss there, but that's because the war boss is essentially never seen, or very rarely seen, in winning lists with anything other than knobs. Mind you guys, these are winning lists, as in they either went at least 2-1 or ranked in the top 3 of an RTT, or they got at least 3 to wins out of 5 at a GT and still got high scoring. So it wasn't. I know that some people are like, "Oh, I use them with my boys to get." I understand how they can be used. It's fun. I'm talking about winning lists. When you bring knobs, you're always bringing a war boss. There's typically not knobs on their own, even with the big choppas, not in the winning list. That being said, knobs as the scalpel unit have come to fruition, as we've been talking about on this channel a lot. We knew based off their volume attack, the -2 AP and the strength that they have is something that we lack as a whole in our index. -2 makes a big difference when you're going into Armor of Contempt. Miles have a 2 of save. You just don't want your whole army to be -1 AP. So a lot of the time, a lot of these competitive lists are opting in for paying that extra little tax on the knobs, get that power clause incorporated, that good strength incorporated, and you stick the war boss in there for an additional volume of attacks by himself with a nice extra strength of a strength 11 coming from the war boss turning the wall. So not in the built-in -1 to wound, obviously great. Someone has +1 to wound, you can stack that again. Sometimes you'll see the feel no pain super cyborg body on the war boss as well, so that he can be precisioned out of a unit prior to the knobs being, wanting to get everything done and fighting in death. So as a whole, knobs serve a very particular role as a scalpel unit, as if you see an enemy unit that you really reliably have to get rid of, throw the knobs into them. Of course, I understand that they're not the best trade. They're quite expensive, but orcs themselves as a faction, we are great at skirmishing and trading into almost every army in the game. Knobs are the only unit that you're not going to get the same exact points return, right? Sometimes you're going to go into a 5-man unit Terminators and you really don't want them running around. You're going to throw knobs into them. You might lose more knobs than you want, but it's still worth it because you scalpeled out the problematic unit while the rest of your units, like we said earlier, WAAAGH boys win their skirmishes and get you nice points in return. So don't be scared to use knobs just because they're a little pretty penny. They're used because they serve a particular role in one of our weaknesses, which is lack of AP. And to an extent, their strength is great against elite infantry because they get up to that nice, sweet strength 10, which just crumps on T5 models, aka Termies. So let's move on to something that won't surprise anybody. The Beast Boss. So the Beast Boss started making it more into list because people started realizing this is a great mid-tier kind of skirmish army because it still stays under sub 200 points, so it doesn't tax you, but he serves a very particular role, as in if you got a Mauler Fiend, if you got a Rhino, if you got specific not hyper elite enemy vehicles or monsters running into your lines like a Harl Specs, sometimes you just need to reliably crump that unit out without throwing away your army, and that's where Beast Bosses come in with the Beast Snagger Boys. Now they didn't make it to the Beast Snagger Boys level on this ranking because people will bring them on their own, like Beast Snagger Boys. But Beast Bosses, when they are incorporated, they're usually multiple being incorporated. I actually started using one too because I do see the value in having a unit that's under 200 points that can punch up or just deal with a problematic monster that you have to deal with. And he's only 10 more points than a War Boss. So he's great. Keep in mind that you're most likely using the Beast Choppa. And some people would go, why would I do that? Because you're going for his dev wounds that he gets innately against monsters. That's his particular role. Can he do other things, being strength 10, -2 damage? Yes, he can. But that is his main primary role. I essentially never use him for fighting anything other than that unless he's already crumped a vehicle or a monster. So Beast Bosses have now he's come back into the list. He wasn't really showing getting too much love back then because people were like, why would I bring him? It makes the unit expensive. That's why you bring him. He's another specific tool into specific problems that orcs can have. And we don't want to throw away our more killy, crumpy, expensive units into every monster vehicle that we run into. And that's where the Beast Boss comes into play.
Right. And his data sheet has a good synergy with that anti-monster, anti-vehicle, and dev wounds. That's where he's really making his money, his points back.
And of course, when you're going to do exploding 5, sustained 5, with unbridled carnage, and you're +1 to hit, so the unit's hitting on 2s, and you get to reroll against monsters, you're essentially going to pick up anything that's not a 5 or a 6 and just reroll it, because you're just going to get a ton of attacks off that. And that's really where he spikes on damage. He'll come in there with 6, maybe 7 attacks during the WAAAGH, but when you use unbridled carnage and re-roll it, he'll easily get up to 11. And like I said, re-roll those 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, because mathematically, it's going to be better than just re-rolling the 1s. So don't forget to re-roll everything. And now let's go on to WAAAGH Scragbag. Now, WAAAGH is getting a little less popular, and I understand why. The problem with WAAAGH is that you look at him and you think, I'm going to just crump and annihilate everything. And then you realize his Gut Ripper is only -1 AP, and his base strength is only strength 7. And that does become problematic against some enemy armies and some kind of odd durability units that aren't vehicles or monsters, right? And so he is just unreliable when it comes to actually offensive output. What he's really good at is as a distraction Carnifex. He's actually really good at getting your whole enemy army to commit into trying to kill him, because they look at his data sheet and go, man, he's definitely going to annihilate and kill everything. I have to annihilate him. And you know what? There's times that he really will annihilate, right? Just punch up, punch out. But it does come to him landing those devastating wounds, essentially, sometimes with that mouth. And that mouth is only strength 7. I do like that it's -2 and that it gets great damage. Don't mind. I'm not saying he never crumps. I'm just saying for nearly 200 points, he's not reliably always crumping. Okay? But that's okay. That's not always his purpose. His purpose, a lot of the times at the top tables, is to draw people into firing lanes they don't want to be in, draw people into fights or overcommitments that they don't want to be in, because they don't want to have to deal with him late game, whereas durability is extremely problematic, right? Early games, people can just throttle and throw everything into him, and that's okay. If you position them well, position your counter-punching units and everything, you don't mind WAAAGH taking 800 points of guns when you can just reposition all the trucks you have on your list or all of the 18 Squighog boys you have on your list. So WAAAGH himself, he can be used as a distraction or as a crump. It really comes down to who are you going into. And that's the way you want to think. You want to think, I always have to punch with him, or I have to always throw him away. You want to find the median based off who you're fighting. Like I always say, consider your meta, consider your matchup, and how you're going to use your army. You can't just be one single-minded sometimes, especially with characters that have a diverse profile like WAAAGH, because he's a great mix of durable and killy.
Yeah, that 4-up funeral pin is so problematic. It's hard to gauge how much to commit into him. So it's so easy to either overcommit or undercommit. And either way, you're in trouble.
Yes, and that 4-up invuln, right? I love the 4-up invuln better than the Beast Boss and Squigglesore, which is a 5-up the 5-up invuln. When you're dealing with anti-tank weapons, and it's a low volume attack typically, the 4-up invuln makes a huge difference, especially when you're willing to throw CP into that. Enemies will typically overcommit into WAAAGH. Now, let's move on to number 9, Flash Gits. Of course, Flash Gits are also, just without showing them, Captain Badrock. You're never going to have Captain Badrock on a list on himself, and you're never going to have Flash Gits without Captain Badrock, okay? So in your mind, just know that they're together, they go in tandem. Captain Badrock, I'll tell you what he does, and we can pull it up at some point maybe, but as a whole, Captain Badrock has a better gun profile than Flash Gits. He's -2 AP, flat 2 damage. But when he overcharges and becomes strength 7, and when he overcharges and becomes hazardous, it's strength 8 -3 damage. Mind you, he also gives the whole unit rerolls the hit at range. Okay, so he doesn't reroll the hit roll when you're fighting. That would be amazing, but he does reroll the hit at range, and he has an aura of -1 toughness. Now, why is that so good? Because if you take a look at the melee weapons of these Flash Gits, not only do they get 1 more attack than baseline boys and knobs, essentially, because knobs get base 3, but Flash Gits get 4 attacks because they're essentially holding choppas, and choppas used to give additional extra attacks. So knobs are innately knobs. Flash Gits are innately knobs. Then GW just added the choppa attack, so they're sitting at strength 4 attacks, but they're sitting at strength 5 because you got to remember that Flash Gits are knobs. That's why they're 2 wounds. So flash gets can crump, they can punch. So not only are they just laying into enemy during Overwatch, not only are they just shooting up enemy units with full rerolls and the Captain Badrook giving them, the ammo runs, giving them once per game a lethal hits ability, but late game when you really are running, people are running out of assets and units, take those guys, charge into an enemy unit, make them -1 toughness. You're sitting at strength 5. Most likely you'll be able to at least be wounding on 4s if it's an enemy infantry unit. And that's something I like to always bring up, guys, is when you can get a data sheet that's multi-purpose, as in it can serve multiple phases of the game to somewhat efficiency, that's when you're getting a great point return on that unit. And that's when that unit is going to start rising in the meta and start rising in the prolificency of how often it's being used. And that's what we see with flash kits. They were nowhere to be found, and then they were everywhere to be found. They didn't make it higher on this list than I thought they would, and David, but the reason they didn't is more likely because people just didn't have them or have them painted. But in the top performing list, as in people who were winning GTs or placing in the top 5 at GTs, they almost all essentially had flash kits, guys. I'm not going to say all, but the vast majority of successful lists did have a unit of flash kits on them and Captain Badrook. So they are a little bit lower on the list than you might expect, but they are on the higher echelon of the tiered list they ended up on. So that's very telling.
Well, and we didn't really see them come out as often until like mid of this month. So I anticipate next month they're going to be higher up on this ranking.
No, that's
especially because of their dual purpose.
Yeah, that's actually a good point too. Yeah, and I think people are getting better at using them. Yes. I mean, I started to use them, and I'd say my first game, I was kind of like, man, what do I do? What do I do with this? I'm not a shooty orc. I'll just say that off the bat, guys. I've always been a crumper, and if I do shoot, it's only because I have some kind of mech units. I've never been the type to bring like shooting infantry other than looters during 8th edition and bad ones when I was new to the game. So as a whole, it took me a second to kind of figure out how to incorporate them and play them correctly. But once I realized, hey, it's not only the Overwatch, it's not only shooting from the truck, it's not only throttling when you get out of the vehicle, but it's also when you decide to get stuck in with them, they can start clearing out enemy units in melee as well late game when you need to utilize every one of your points that's left over. So if you don't got flash kits yet, or you really like the model, I definitely recommend getting them in there, enjoying them while we have the index. And then even if something changes and you don't like them later, I love my flash kits models. They're beautiful, they're great, and they're very big, which is kind of the hard part of playing with them. So yes, flash kits, making it on the top 10. Little clap or little whoa for the flash kits. Now let's move on to number 10. Knob on Smash a Squig. So Knob on Smash a Squig wasn't, very used very often before. The Beast Boss on Squigosaur was actually used more often than him prior to this video and last month. I truly believe it's for 2 reasons. One is the Beast Boss on Squigosaur, when you do give him Edwapa Skill Chopper, which you most likely will, because without it, he's not that killy. Enemies look at him, they look at Mazrog, and they go, I'm way more likely to kill that guy. And he has their enhancement. So it becomes double point of investment for them, and then they end up trying to snipe him out as early as possible. So sometimes you don't get the return for your enhancement, compared to a Knob on Smash a Squig who is hiding within a already very durable and annoying unit to displace. So a lot of the times you'll run into the first enemy unit that you want to use the Edwapa Skill Chopper on, and then once you crump that unit, the enemy tries to punch you back. The Knob is still alive with a couple of the Squigs, and he gets to run up and punch another unit, still utilizing the enhancement. And then during the WAAAGH, having it anti-monster, anti-take on a 3+ is great, guys. I know people are like, but a 4 is great. I promise the 3+ makes a huge difference, even with the Beast Boss and Squigosaur having slightly more attack. Because here's one thing to keep in mind. For the Squighog unit plus him as a whole, you're more likely to get a return on investment for Unbridled Carnage. So it feels great to use Unbridled Carnage on a unit that already has a bunch of Squigs that are great on their own, on top of a Knob, a character that's hard to remove on his own, that has an enhancement. Okay, so on a lot of winning lists, he's become very, very, very popular. So popular that he's pushed the Beast Boss on Squigosaur out of the top 10. Okay, and I know a lot of people, other channels or communities or whatever, are like, man, I really like my Beast Boss on Squigosaur, and I'm going to bring 3 or 4, but not 4. But you're going to bring 2 or 3, and then you got Mazrog as your 4th kind of dude. I don't favor that. Of course, everything's relying on the meta. If you got a lot of monsters, I can see why you bring more of those guys. But generally across all factions and matchups, you're going to get a little bit more use on the Smash a Squig, and then throw Maz in there for that distraction card effects.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot more because of the reasons you stated, as well as with how popular Squighog boys are. This guy's buffing them with the +1 hit. Yeah. You're just getting more efficiency out of that unit.
Yeah, and I you got to remember the mounts on the Squig Hog Boys are hitting on 4s, guys. And you really want those additional attacks coming from that unit because they are 2 damage each. So just it, like David said, it's so many benefits to bringing him, even if you don't bring him with Edwapa's Kill Chopper. But at the least, you're bringing him with Edwapa's Kill Chopper. But I've seen people just bring, Cunning but Brutal, so they could fall back if they bring that on the second one, So not on Smash the Squig. I like them, use them all the time, and I'm not surprised they're in the top 10. Very happy to see that. Now, that's our top 10, but I have our honorable mentions. And this month's honorable mentions are 1, the boys. So boys made it on a lot of successful winning lists, usually because they fill up trucks easily. They have good OC. You get a nice power claw, which is slightly better than the Beast Snagga's, little snapper, because that's only -1 AP, but the power claw is -2 AP and more strength. And the boys are, when you compare what other chaff type units are in the game, boys demolish them. Boys are like, yeah, right, the little get whoop, and you just smash them out, which is why boys are great. Plus, you don't care if you lose the unit. 85 points is almost nothing for you. And then you mix that with the truck. My gosh, 135 points for playing all the secondaries, all the board control, and additional OC. Boys are just great. Of course, if you have to, you can throw some bombs into them. But as a whole, boys are a great honorable mention. If you have them, use them. I've seen them in 20-man units. You can use a knob with wall banner. You can follow me, lads. Use the strat. Here we go. And then all of a sudden, you have and you call the wall with the banner, and you have a first turn 1 possible charge with the 20-man brick, or throw them in a Stampa, throw them in a battle wagon, 20-man bricks with the feel no pain, like Mad Dog Rotsnick. There's a bunch of ways that boys can be used. You just gotta be a little more creative, or just be willing to be cheap with them, and that's good.
And having the grenades keyword is a nice little plus too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, and the free rocket in the unit too, just out of the truck and just pop, 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 pop. So boys made it, and then the other honorable mention that I really like to see were War Bikers. War Bikers almost made it in the top 10, guys. They really, really did. And as we got later into the month, we started seeing more bikers and the Death Killer War Trike. So don't be surprised if next month the Death Killer War Trike makes it on the list. Because War Bikers, like we've been talking about, people first were like, oh, just go for the Groth, super cheap. Then they're like, well, I'll go for Storm Boys because they're just a little more expensive. Then they're like, well, if I have my Storm Boys and I like the utility they're bringing, why don't I just bring Bikers for 10 more points and have a throwaway unit with still 2 OC, with good movement and odd durability of T6 with the 4-up armor save, and a little bit of shooting. But honestly, that shooting isn't going to help for anything other than like Termagants or Guardsmen, which is still okay because a 3-man biker squad is only 75 points. And again, another keyword, grenades. Again, you have grenades, guys. And because we lack shooting as a whole, as a faction, grenades have become very useful. And so many armies are like, I get bonus durability and stacking durability, just to throw more wounds on them. And that's going to always feel kind of good. Of course, you get a power claw from that unit too. And the potential you get from pressuring your army to enemy units from bikers and war trikes and such is a very popular way to play orcs, and that's the kind of way I like to play, is pressure. I like to be a pressure player. I think a lot of orc players feel the same way. So that is our top 10 with 2 honorable mentions. It was a nice change-up, guys. I mean, I actually really looked forward to doing this list because as we always do our WAAAGH Wednesdays, we see lists, we see people that are winning, we see matchups, and I was already getting kind of like a feeling like, hey, man, I think bikers are kind of making their way in here. Oh, man, flash kits are kind of appearing everywhere, and that's exactly why, and they are successfully being found on all these lists. Like I said earlier, flash kits became on the most successful list. Flash kits were one of the most popular units, right along the nods, actually, very close. So we did have a bit of a shakeup in the top 3. Trucks are still holding strong, being super amazing, not surprising anybody. Enjoying while you got them. Fun to kit bash your own too. And a couple of the units made their rise, like the knob on Smash Squig. So I really like to see that. Our index is so open. Our meta's way to play is so open as a whole, as a faction. You're not limited to flash kits either, just shooting. Those quick rugged trucks, quick buggies in there too. Stuff like that. Battle wagons, not just trucks. So even though this is our top 10, because this is what we've seen and counted up to being the best units, doesn't mean you can't run other very successful units. So don't be discouraged if units you like, favor, own, or want to play with are not in the top 10. Just look for something similar as a substitute and come up with your own way to WAAAGH. because we're all war bosses and we all get crumpet differently, right? So don't ever think of this video as, oh man, I gotta go out and get my squig hog boys and I gotta get my flash gets. No. I'm letting you know, as a fellow war boss, this is what is the most successful. Maybe you want to incorporate a couple of these units alongside your other units, right? We've seen plenty of lists that have a battle wagon plus trucks. Okay, it's just battle wagons didn't make it to the top 10. Doesn't mean they're not useful. Doesn't mean they're not good. Just because Beast Boss and Squiggle Sword didn't make it to the top 10 doesn't mean he's not useful. Doesn't mean he's not good. We're just telling you what has risen to the top this month and what will next month store for us. Is that ready? Are we ready for some chats now?
Yeah.
Let's get into the chats, kids. Tell me what you got.
All right, we got Cassio Far. Let's go, Orcs.
Let's go. Whoa. I'm extra pumped today, guys. I'm extra pumped. Okay, so don't freak out if I'm wowing all day.
Austin Hatfield. Here we go, Orc. Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
And Blake Kittrell with Howdy.
Howdy. And then I'm pretty sure Blake is in our Discord. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So shout out to you, Blake. I see you.
Sandor Horniak.
There you are.
Konochi. Wow.
That was pretty great. I couldn't even walk. I was cracking up.
Sean McDaniel. Whoa, bosses never caught one of these live. First time.
Oh, I'm glad you can make
Welcome.
it. Any of you guys that can make it, we appreciate it. As a whole, our channel is going to be doing long streams, and interacting with the community, having ways, a little soundboard. We actually got our computer today that we need to put together. So it's only going to get better. The lives are going to get better, more interactive, more fun. I'll be on here for hours and having fun talking to you guys. The community is great to talk to. You guys have great ideas. You guys are way better painters than me, so it's really fun to just talk to all of you.
Joel Atkins. What's up, ya gets? Whoa.
Whoa. What's up, Joel? Yeah, bosses.
So, Thor, do you think any orc units will get nerfed or buffed in the September update? Hi, lads.
I think based off how orcs are doing right now, and GW does pay attention to the stats, orcs are kind of in that Goldilocks zone where GW is actually less likely to address them in a negative or positive way. If you're new to kind of how GW operates, they tend to look at the worst and the very, very best. That's also why as Aldari, GSC, maybe Necrons, Custodes kind of get kneecapped, brought back down to reality, orcs are just going to rise, right? When people first looked at our index maybe a month and a half ago, they were calling us B tier. As this month has progressed, they're calling us A tier. So imagine once you start knocking out some of our mad matchups, we're going to just jump right up into A+ tier, possibly even top elite armies of the game. But the reason we typically don't get to that point is because orcs are actually very, very skill-based army. Because we don't do anything that's broken or unheard of. You know exactly what we're trying to do. We call our WAAAGH at the beginning of the turn. That way the enemy definitely knows what we're doing. But because we play the primary points of 40K, which is the mission, the point scoring, the board control, the technicalities of charging, piling in, consolidations, that's how you win 40K at the top levels. And that's actually what the top orc players always have to do, and even mid-level orc players have to do to be successful. So that's why we don't typically get hit too hard with too many nerfs, because as a whole, we do good because our players are very, very good when we get to the top echelon of games, because they conquered the basics. And the basics win you games.
Yeah, orcs are going to get indirectly buffed, like you mentioned. All these other armies are under the radar. Worst thing that could possibly happen if GW doesn't like these 9-truck lists.
Yeah.
Maybe trucks go up a little bit.
Yeah, I could see them making trucks go up a bit. Is there another unit that nobody likes? Honestly, I mean, you hear a couple people here and there complain about flash gets, but honestly, they're just haters because they don't like getting shot up by orcs. So, yeah, honestly, trucks are the only unit I could see GW being like, you need 15 points increase.
Wicked Joe. Wow, what up, bosses?
Oh, that's the lads.
Joel loves his bikes.
Yep, the bikes are great, man. I like my bikes too. I got so many. I'm looking to start running them big units, especially once we get a codex. We know that we're getting up to 5 additional detachments plus the one we have now. And I mean, don't be surprised if one of them is a speed wall.
Jinja J painting. What are the most unused
Ooh,
units?
that's a good question.
Ludas?
I would no, actually no.
Oh, are they? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to
actually,
throw
as I
something
was
out.
going through the list, guys, Ludas weren't the least used.
Oh.
I started seeing like 5-man units thrown in here and there, and I was like, hey, if I had to say
Hunter Rig?
Hunter
I know
Rig,
that's been on.
but I seen him on one of our videos. Actually, no, the unit that is like never used is one of the buggy units. It's the rocket truck squig bug. No, sorry, that's the great one. The Waz Boom.
The Boondocka
Yeah, the
Snazwagon.
Boondocka Snazwagon is one that I've just never seen on the list, guys.
What about Big Ed Boss Funko?
Okay, Big Ed. That's a Fort. David's right. Okay, Big Ed Forest Boss Fortress has never been played on the table in existence other than silly narrative games. So I guess the Big Ed Boss Funko. I'll say that Dagger. Shout out to Daggers. Put his on top of a Stampa. So I guess it was kind of indirectly played. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's taken out.
But no, I'd say that buggy, of course, the fortification, the planes are not being used pretty much at all.
Tank Busters.
And Tank Busters, exactly. Tank Busters was another one, good job, that are just not being dropped. They're just not getting their points returned. Having pistols incorporated in a unit that one dude that wants to punch you is just weird. And they cost so much. So yeah, Tank Busters, certain squig buggies, the planes, and my favorite fortress. To answer your question.
Blake Kittrell with some nice words. Thank you for all you do.
And thank you for being here, lads. I mean, really, I look forward to it. I was excited today. And now that we got the computers, I get to interact with you guys more. We'll have little soundboards, so I don't always have to constantly be silly on you guys. You can hear some legit WAAAGHs that we have set up. So we actually have a lot of sounds already, and like orc sayings. We got all this stuff set up. We just need the computer. Yeah. We got to get kind of caught up in tech. That might end up being later in the month because David's going to be gone in Italy, and he's our real mech boy here. I'm really just the art head. I'm really just the art boy, not really the brightest get. But look forward to that because our live streams are going to just take off. It's going to be super fun, and I want to interact with you guys.
Blake's also letting us know that the Bike Blob rocked it today.
Exactly, Blake, another guy. See, Blake's ahead of the curve already. He didn't even know this list was going on. Yes, bikers and Killer War Trikes. Shout out to a bunch of guys in our Discord kind of talking about it, bouncing ideas, using them different ways. They realize bikes are a good way to get to custodes before they get to where they want to get. So, yeah, man, I'm glad that you're using them, and I definitely keep encouraging other people to keep using them because a lot of the time people are like, I can't use it. I'm just going to use trucks. No, more bikes serve a great purpose.
Joel Adkins appreciated that question as well.
Yeah.
And he was also thinking the Boondocka.
Yeah, the Boondocka. You think it has like an aura of -1 to hit when you get close to it? And I'm like, why? You just custom boost the blast to someone and shoot them. You can hit them once and you make a -1 to hit. That's much better.
Ronan's review. Time for a rule discussion? Question mark.
Whoa. Yeah, we'll get to a rule at some point. Not in this one. I mean, unless you have a question for a rule, we start talking about it. But we didn't put forward any questionable rules or anything at the moment. For the most part, we're sitting in a good spot where not too many people are that confused with what our index is or what we're trying to do or what our faction really is all about. What our faction's about, scoring, board control, crumping. So master the basics, as in how to pile in, how to consolidate, how to get more models into combat. Also keep in mind, guys, in case you forgot, this is important for us as orcs. In this edition, you do not, I repeat, do not need to declare a unit in the charge phase to fight it. Meaning you can charge an enemy unit that's adjacent to it, pile into that enemy unit that's next to him, and then fight him. Yes, I took a second so that you guys can think about that. If you don't believe me, go look at the rules. Because that's actually a great way that we can use one of our advantages as being big units, being big models. Charge one guy, you get a great charge, pile into another unit, and crump it with the tail end, right? There's times where my Beast Mega Boys, I'll put the Beast Boss, maybe the Knob, into the actual enemy unit I want them to kill, and then I put the boys into maybe a chaff unit sitting next to them or a shooting unit sitting next to them. So don't sleep on that either, guys. Since you wanted to talk about rules, that's a rule that I've been trying to keep in mind more.
Ronan following up with a question. When a unit is inside a vehicle, do you have access to the unit's abilities?
No, you do not have access to the unit's data sheet abilities. You do not. But what you do have access to, such as the flash gets, is you do still get sustained 1. So you get the weapons abilities themselves right under the data sheet, in the data sheet, but you do not get the data sheet abilities. So you get the with weapons, actual bonuses, buffs, whatever you want to call them. But for the actual unit itself, like abilities of drive-by DACA, you don't get that kind of ability in your trucks. But that's an excellent question because a lot of people are wondering that too. So when you're shooting your flash hits out of vehicles, you do still get sustained 1. That's what I like to see.
And Cassio Far, as a new orc player, this channel is super helpful. Thanks, guys, and everyone in the Discord.
Yeah, cool. Exactly. Discord's excellent, guys. A lot of those guys are way better painters than me. A lot of them have even more massive collections or more niche collections than me because they've been playing the game longer than I've been alive. So that's really cool. So, of course, join the Discord. I always come on here to remind you guys this isn't necessarily a competitive channel, but orcs and playing your faction to its optimal, you need to be aware of the meta. Embrace parts of it just so that you can kind of have good game experience and not get tabled initially. But it's really about incorporating what's meta and what you got, what you like. And if you don't have what's meta, substitute it with something similar. You don't got Storm Boys, throw some Death Goblins in there. Stuff like that. And that's why we're here. We're here for the new players. We're here for the old-timey players. We're here for the competitive. We're here for the greenskins as a whole. Because remember, it's not about the results of the fight. It's about the experience of a proper scrap.
And Joel's echoing that same sentiment.
Yeah,
Appreciate
Joel's
it.
one of the main guys too. Exactly.
Yeah. And thanks for everyone that's participating in the Discord.
For sure. And if you even show up to our live streams and talk to us, I mean, that motivates us and puts good ideas in our head. There's been several times where someone has commented something and then it becomes a video idea or a topic of discussion or something I incorporated to one of my lists. So don't ever think that your decision or your opinion doesn't matter. It greatly matters because 40K is so complex and diverse. The way people WAAAGH, that's why I always like to say that we all WAAGH differently. You can disagree with me. It doesn't offend me at all because we all have our preferences and our strengths, how we think and how we play, and the armies that we're facing on a regular basis.
And Jinja says, I think the Boomdaka's aura could be useful during a well-timed wall in the event you're worried about fights first or intervene.
Of course, I would never, like I just said, we all WAAGH differently. I'm sure you could incorporate it. All I was saying was they were the least used units when we come across all the lists, especially successful lists, right? No offense, I didn't look at lists that like lost every game. I still appreciate those people. It would just be a lot of lists. I'm just saying that to add the other question is, he said what are the least popular units, and that's just a unit I've not seen the entire edition being used, which is like planes. So I'm not saying you can't use a plane. Someone brought up I'm always messing up the word planes. The boom. No, that's going back. The WAAAGH bomb blasted jet. There we go. The big orc plane that has the mech gun incorporated it, and it has a great gun. It has an ability to get +1 to hit. Sorry, David's gonna pull it up. Yeah, it's the wound. I can't remember the words. WAAAGH boom blasted jet.
Each time this model makes a range attack that targets a unit that cannot fly, reroll hit roll 1.
There you go. That unit has great profiles in its gun profiles, so it could be used by a proper Kun and War boss, but we're not seeing any planes on the list. So that's what I was trying to say forward. I'm never going to say units are completely useless other than boss head but there's just some datasheets that I just straight up haven't seen at all. And if you're a smart, cunning, proper war boss, I'm sure you can speed boss. I'm sure you can incorporate every buggy into your list and have some modicum of expense. Actually, I believe there's a princess. When it's someone from Discord, I don't want to mess up her name or his or her name, but they've been using all the buggies and trying it out, playing the speed WAAAGH still to this day. So if you go in the Discord, I'm sure you bring them up, you'll get some responses.
Yeah, just to remind everyone what that Boomdaka's aura is, it's a -1 hit when it's within 6 inches of an enemy.
Yep.
All right, Ginger says, I can't defend the boss head bunker outside of being beautiful.
I appreciate that you considered trying, though. You know, that comment means you thought about defending it. You're like, oh, what can I do here? Yes. How I defended it is Daggers, shout out to Daggers, put it on a Stampa, and then brought it to a tournament, and then he won first place. So that's how you can incorporate him and defend him.
And Ronan is thankful for answering that question he had. It's been a point of discussion every week at his game.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Glad you brought that up.
Joel says, it's a uniqueness that makes us greenskins great Wow.
Very, very true. The only other army that's even close to our kind of flexibility or our kind of mentality are the Guard. Actually, Astronaut taught them. Those guys, their community is kind of similar to ours with old kit bash, and they're creative and they're diehard core fans and such. So whenever you meet a Guard player, shake their hand before you crump them and bonk them on the head. All right, but definitely crump them.
And Jared Brown, sorry for being slow, but did I understand you? I can fight multiple times in one fight phase if I consolidate into a second unit?
No, when you pile in to an additional unit, you can still fight with that unit, but other models can fight it.
You have to split your attacks.
Yeah, you have to split your attack because there's pile in, which happens before you fight, and then consolidations happens after you fight. So what I'm saying is, let's say I got a Mauler Fiend right here, and then I have Cultist sitting directly behind it. I charge the Mauler Fiend, and my Beast Snag Boys kind of tail out into the Cultist, and I pile into them, even though I didn't make them and declare them in my charge. I can still fight the Cultist as long as I was able to pile into them. I don't have to declare them in the charge phase. So that's how you can utilize units like the Beast Snag Boys. Is the boys themselves sometimes aren't going to do anything to the monster, and you just want to put the knob in the Beast Boss into the unit. Therefore, if you can touch another enemy unit, draw them into combat, you can also punch them. And that really matters. That's a difference because in prior editions, you couldn't do that. You had to declare the unit you wanted to fight in the charge phase. And if you pile it into another unit, they could punch you, but you couldn't punch it back. That has now been changed. You can fight units that you pile into.
Yeah, and also before in previous editions, when you'd have to multi-call multiple units, if you didn't make that further unit, you'd fail your charge.
Yeah,
that's why this is very important.
Yeah, guys, because if it was even 1 inch difference and you rolled under that, you just failed the charge as a whole. Now you're like, man, I'd like to touch that other unit, but this one's closer. Let me just roll my charge. Oops, an 11. You know what? I'm going to get some guys into the other unit too and punch them out. So that's great.
Or Wicked Joe, thanks for all your great advice. I'm a new orc player, old boomer. I started my mob of boys with the boarding patrol and combat patrol boxes.
Ooh, nice. I hope that video was useful that we did for that. And I'm glad you're here. I mean, I really like your new greenskins, your spores, your wild boys. So I really like that, but that's what the community is for. Is then you also got very hard-skinned old knobs that are around that are just waiting more bosses that have everything, have the biggest power cloud, the biggest armor, and they're like, come over here, boy, before I crump you. So it's perfect.
And Joel, respect to the god.
Respect to the little humies for the little umies they get because they try, even though they're about as strong as a Gretchen. Ha! Sucks for them. And is that it for the chat today? Ooh, that was a great chat, guys. I appreciate you guys interacting so much. You asked some good questions. Some of you guys maybe laughed pretty hard. So, of course, bring it up. If you ever send me a direct message in Discord, know that I am an ARD boy and I do not utilize Discord correctly sometimes. So don't be surprised if I lag to reply. But every time one of you guys messages us, and we see it, it definitely motivates us, definitely encourages us, it keeps us strong-minded and strong-willed in providing content and being open-minded in our way to play the game. So appreciate your support. You don't have to kiss our butts, but any kind of love you give us, just so you know, is greatly appreciated, and we feel it, and it matters a lot, even on the days that we're studying and doing the more tedious things. The reward is coming here and talking to you guys and getting the community going, and it feels great. And shout out to Warboss Brandon. Warboss Brandon right now is at Nova. He was actually on the live stream. You guys can check that out. He was playing and he ended up doing great in there. And he actually sent the channel his 3D printed kill tanks. So don't be surprised if I start incorporating some kill tanks and utilizing them myself. So shout out to Brandon. Like I said, guys, this is a community. He gets love for being a proper war boss as well. And then he supports us by giving us his ideas and, stuff like that too. And a lot of other guys that are on this channel, Joel, Daggers, WAAAGH, a lot of you guys that have been around since we were just, spores, that matters a lot. So, and if I didn't shout you out, don't think I don't remember you. Just remember I'm an art boy and my memory is about the size of a squirrel's mind. So thank you all. And we're cats. We're good. We're good.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, y'all. So I appreciate you. Keep in touch. Let us know what's going on. But there's one thing to always keep in mind. Don't cross the wall, because we knock your teeth out. Whoa.